but by evolving, by innovating, by staying fresh, and by always remembering that you've got to get the fundamentals right, this is what a performance trajectory can look like over a really extended period of time. So as we embrace the radical evolution of our world today, then let's remember that the fundamentals are still there to give us confidence. I guess that begs the question, what are these fundamentals that you speak of? And I think they're these things. I don't profess to be an expert on every category. I've worked in drinks for about 20 years, and I think if you get these things right, at least in my sector, then you'll be okay. You can migrate the changes. Flair, agility, consumer insight, and execution. FACE, if you like, acronyms. And why those 4 words? Flair, because you can't analyze your way to greatness, is my profound belief, particularly if consumers are making an emotional decision about your brand. We need feel, we need touch, we need to anticipate, we need to stand in a place where we think consumers will go, and we need to invite them to join us there. And that's not an analytical skill set. That's about flair. Agility, I think, is a lovely word. Speed is a competitive advantage. I think everyone would accept that. But I'd probably go as far as to say that a good idea that you can't execute for a year is by definition a bad idea. Agility is key and always has been. Consumer insight, and by consumer insight, I don't mean the tracking study that's given to the planner to tell us what's going on. I'm talking about deep down understanding of the psychology, the motivation, and the behavior of people, which is right up to the minute at the heart of our creative process. If you have that, in any conditions, I would submit that you've got a good chance of being able to go run with consumers and convince them to run with you. And finally, execution. I like a good strategy, the same as the next person. But you can't take strategy to the bank, unfortunately. And I would argue that great execution can probably survive a dodgy strategy, but it doesn't matter how clever your strategy. If the execution's wrong, then you're sunk. So, get these 4 things right: flair, agility, consumer insight, execution. Then you're set fair for the tumultuous change that's occurring in any era, but particularly the era that we find ourselves in today. Indeed, I, like all of the other speakers this week, could talk to any one of these bullet points ad nauseum. We could talk about the fact that this is the first generation of young adults who truly care about personal and corporate responsibility. The number one question amongst Diageo prospective graduate trainees these days: what's your policy on corporate responsibility? When I was a grad trainee, what kind of car do I get? It's changed. And we could dwell on that. We could dwell on the fact that there'll be 60 billion people, no they won't, not in the world, I can't even remember the number now. By 2030, 65, over the age of 65, there'll be something like 2 billion people, fundamentally changing the economic power base in the world. We could talk about the fact that in the emerging markets, we have the first generation of truly economically enabled, economically free women. Economic freedom leads to social freedom, that changes society. And there are many more things that we could talk about, but rather than skim across them, I thought I'd focus on the 2 which I think are the biggest changes that are impacting us today. The emergence of the emerging markets as true world powers, how that impacts us, and technology, and how that changes forever the way that consumers relate to brands. So let's start with emerging markets. Love this sequence of pictures. It's the same view. It's the same view of the Pudong area of Shanghai. You may know it. It's the shot across the Bund. In 20-odd years, it's changed from a series of paddy fields into an extraordinary metropolis in just over 20 years. And that, as a representation of what's happening in emerging markets, should make us stop and think, if we haven't already. The maths of emerging markets are impressive too. There's a lot more people, right? And there's a load of stats on it. One which grabs my attention. Every single year, 100 million people reach legal drinking age, reach adulthood. 100 million people every single year. 20 million in China alone. Extraordinary statistics. More people is a good thing. More people to aspire to our brands and to purchase them. Now, what's interesting and perhaps not surprising is that as people get more wealth, they also spend more. So not only do we have more people in the emerging markets, but their spend per capita is constantly increasing. And I think this is simply because Abraham Maslow was right. When you're worried about food and shelter and water, you don't really think about things that would enhance the broader aspects of your life. But once you've got them covered, and economists argue about whether that's at $2,000 a year income for the family or $10,000 a year. But certainly at $10,000 a year, you're in the game for premium brands. In my category, in many other categories too. The more people spending more because as they become economically enabled, they have the option to aspire to the kind of brands that we sell.